Goff told you earlier, primary schools see a 9.5% enrollment drop in 5 years as 70,000 seats go unfilled. This is according to a recent Gleaner article that also revealed that 2 schools were closed in St. Andrew and St. James. To tell us what is causing this, if he knows, we're joined by the president of the Jamaica Teachers Association, the principal of Monroe, Dr. Mark Smith. Morning, sir. Welcome.
Good morning, gentlemen.
I just want to read something before I jump at you here. Mount Hermon Primary in Portland, 19 students, they could have 325. White Marl Primary and Infant, 46 students out of 555. Somerset Primary and Infant in St. Andrew with 22 out of 245. Clarity College Primary in Portland, 9 out of 70, 18 out of 110, 93 out of 650. That's ridiculous. What's going on with that?
Well, we're seeing our, good morning, gentlemen. Yeah. We're seeing our shifts in terms of demographics and populations across the island. And we're seeing a movement from rural to urban areas. And I think that's a big driving force. Added to that is a reduction in our birth rate overall. And so that is just a reality we have to now cope with going forward. And I think we have to have a strategy to see how best we can manage the dynamics.
Yeah, but in this case, as you just said, migration just means that I move from one area to another area. So are those kids still not going to school? Or?
No, typically what we have found is that we have some schools that are overcrowded and other schools are underpopulated. And so we find in more rural communities and in some instances, in some urban communities where there may be higher levels of crime, you're going to find that parents are pulling their children and moving them to other institutions. But that does not negate the fact that we're seeing a population decline. And that's really a function we're observing globally, particularly in countries where you have an increase in education levels. Because usually what we see is as people get more educated, as population gets more educated, the birth rates go down. And in some countries, it is an existential threat. So for instance, like Japan, they have an aging population which threatens the viability of that country's economy and as a society in general.
Right. You spoke to just now, you answered a lot of questions that we wanted.
I get any extra points for that?
You probably do. But some schools overcrowded, others underpopulated. What are we talking about? What would be a fair average? What should be classrooms looking like?
Well, typically it should be 20 to 1.
Right.
Right. And I remember many years ago, I used to serve as an education officer in Region 5, the region of champions. And when we were there, I remember actually visiting a school. We had to close it, and it's a consultative process. So we go in, we meet with the community members, we meet with the parents, the teachers. And, you know, what we need to understand, a lot of these schools, people are very attached to them. So it's sometimes very difficult when we have to tell them that we have to close these schools. And in that particular school was around 25 students thereabout to around 8 teachers or 10 teachers. So it was very difficult. And to give a little context to it, the church nearby, and I won't call the school or the church, but there were only 3 persons who attended, but they carried out religious activities every day. It was the lay preacher, his ex-wife and his present wife. And so it kind of gives you the context of how difficult those communities are when they're shrinking and there's no new births, no new people moving in, and a shrinking population. Yeah.
What then is the strategy plan around kind of balancing it? Because again, overpopulated in some instances and underpopulated in others. How do we get that balance, and then how do we ensure that we get kids back in school?
It is not an easy fix at all, because what you're talking about are patterns that are sometimes deeply entrenched in economics, in one. Sometimes changes in social norms. So there was a time when we'd have people would have 10 children. That's not the case now. You're finding people having 1 or 2. People are getting more educated, understanding what it takes to actually take care of children. And so it's changing those norms. I think it is a role for the family life planning board for them to work with a strategy. Because we had this strategy about 2 is too many years ago, and that worked very well. Similar to the Chinese one-child policy, worked very well. But now we have to pivot towards realizing that the sustainability and viability of the economy, because you're talking about a massive fall off over, say, a 7-year period.
Mr. President, I want to go back to something that I asked you about earlier, because when I first started to prepare it and I saw migration, I said, oh, so them going to foreign, no problem. But then I read again, and as you just rightly said, they're moving from one area in Jamaica to another area in Jamaica. So my concern is those kids are still in school. Because when you hear that school close, you kind of feel everybody stay home and can't bother go to school. But those kids are still going to school, right?
Yes, in many instances, what the data is picking up is that many of those children find schools, other schools to attach themselves to. However, we have to think about this as within the context of equity and equality and access, because what we are finding again is that in many rural communities, if the community is dying, then you're going to find that those children now, if you were to close the schools, for instance, in those areas, and this next closest school is 15 or 20 kilometers away, how are you going to end up having those children? Can the parents afford to get them to school? And people say, oh, just bust them in. That's madness. I've heard people say that. And I said, yes, but when you talk about the roads, some of those places, no vehicle will drive there. And so even if you're thinking about putting in a bus system, you'd have to fix the roads. And so it's not an easy fix, but it's something we have to be committed to.
And it's also a concern, I suspect, about the teachers who would have been at those schools and now don't have a job.
Well, precisely, and thankfully we have worked very closely as a union to ensure that we preserve those rights of our teachers. For prominent in Jamaica, we have once you have worked over a year and you're appointed, you really have tenure. And so through the voluntary relocation program that was used a few years ago, we were able to move teachers into other schools that they were needed, where they were. What we don't want is a case where people are forced out, and so it's really a consultative process because there's a human element in it that we must always be very aware of.
I'm about to put forward a very basic idea. I don't know if it can work, right? But let me just put it out there. In the instances where, I'm sticking with the teachers, right? In the instances where a school is closed, you had, just for argument's sake on staff, 12 teachers, right? And there is a school that is close enough by that is overpopulated. Is there a means by which those teachers can be moved to support that school to bring down that
so again, there was a provision called the voluntary relocation of teachers program, and so teachers were engaged and teachers were moved to those institutions. And once the teacher was willing to do it, and usually through dialogue we were able to facilitate that. But we also have to understand, if you are one of those teachers that lived in one of these very remote, say 30 kilometers, 40 kilometers away from the next school or from a town area, and then your school is shuttered, you can understand the massive economic fallout. You'd probably have to relocate to another place. So we have to kind of manage those expectations.
Are we just talking about primary schools here?
You have high schools that are also seeing it, but it's not the disparity is not as great. So you find that there are a lot more primary schools we're concerned about because high schools, there's actually, enshrined in our Education Act that allows that primary schools really should be around 6 miles away from, where people live. So children should be able to walk to their primary school. That's the idea when they, establish this structure. And so high schools, however, didn't have that limitation. So you find that high schools are, the distance between is much larger, and you have several of them that are doing very well, but you have others, again, in the more rural communities or in urban areas that are experiencing high levels of crime. What we recognize in these areas is that parents are pulling their children, or sometimes low educational outcomes. And so parents believe that my child will not have a good shot at life if they attend a particular school, and so they're pulling them, and so that's part of the dynamic. And the JTA's position is that we really ensure that we provide them with the resources and support to ensure we can boost the performance in those schools, so that parents feel that whichever school you attend, you have a good shot of accessing not just accessing education, but accessing quality education.
On that note about the high schools, right? And again, another basic idea. Would it be possible to facilitate on a high school campus students who, if you have to close a primary school, could you facilitate a space on a high school campus where those primary school students and teachers could be facilitated to carry on the process rather than, because you're going to shut down the school, but...
Well, and where we are right now, we have to be looking at a multiplicity of solutions, and I'm sure that's something we could read, because there are schools like New Forest, primary, infant primary, and junior high, and high school, so they're all linked together, so that can be facilitated. But what we need to understand is that most of these schools that are being shuttered or considered, the likelihood of being closed, is because of the shrinking community. The community is usually rural, so there's no large area to facilitate them.
Yeah. Thanks for coming, sir.
Thank you so much. Always a pleasure.
Good luck with your team this year, sir.
Congrats with your team. Yes. We did pretty well. Next year is the year. I'm sensing.
Well done, well done. As I said earlier, he's a principal of Monroe, which is what we were talking about.
Bobo.
Just Bobo Skilatin.
Bobo Skiwat Tala Ala Skiwa. I got it, gentlemen.
That's their war cry.
Yes, man.
He's the president of the Jamaica Teachers Association, Dr. Mark Smith. Thanks again, sir.
Thank you, gentlemen.
After the break, balancing your sensory cravings with nutritional needs. Stay with us. So I went to